Hey friends, and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever wondered why there's such high costs for treating chronic Lyme disease, and really why there aren't as many experts out there as you would really like to see, like, those true experts? Well, stick around with me today, because in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 6 reasons that chronic Lyme disease is so freaking expensive to treat, and what you can do to lower the cost of your treatments, and also why we need to really find true experts to help us in our healing pathway. So thanks so much for joining us today. I really wanted to just dive into this one because it's something that's perplexed me for a long time, and I wanted to kind of take a deeper dive, take a look, because chronic Lyme disease really can present really unique challenges in the medical field. Not only is it this complex chronic medical condition, something that's kind of really misunderstood, that has become really difficult to diagnose and treat, but it also really carries these significant financial burdens for patients especially, but also even the physicians and their teams who are treating you. I remember back, I had Lyme disease and chronic babesiosis, and after the first day, the amount of money that I spent just on labs alone just blew my mind. It was exorbitantly high, and this is like 8 years after, going through all these symptoms with no diagnosis. I was so happy to hand over all that money, but man, it stung, and it took me like, 8 or 10 years to actually pay off just that first set of labs. So it's kind of insane. And so I try to really want to boil down today why the cost of treatment can be so exorbitantly high, and it's really often due to a combination of factors. Some of it's that long-term nature of the disease. Some of it's this need for specialized care that's often not covered by your insurance. We like to call it trial and error, right? And I think it's more like we play Lyme chess, right? We have to make a move, and then we have to see what's going on in your body, see what your body's reflecting to us, so that we can create an effective, individualized treatment protocol. You can certainly do this in a way where there's kind of a foundational approach, right? Maybe 60 to 80% of what we're doing might be similar for all comers, so to speak. And then the other, 20, 30% definitely has to be highly individualized. But what I've learned over the years is, despite that, what I just said, we have a groundwork that we start with, but then we have to totally individualize it, and that can be part of the challenge. So anyway, let's unpack this a little bit. So let's dive into those top 6 reasons why the treatment of chronic Lyme disease is so expensive, and maybe we can kind of figure out some of these ways that can make it a little bit easier for you and for your treatment team to get better, right? Here we go. Number 1, it's a complex diagnosis, right? Chronic Lyme disease is notoriously difficult to diagnose due to the wide variety of symptoms that patients can experience, and they can mimic so many other conditions. So if we start, we've got this post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome thing versus chronic Lyme disease. I dive into that in other videos, but essentially one camp is saying people truly have real symptoms, and Dr. Alcott and his group out of Johns Hopkins have talked about this so much. People truly are experiencing bad symptoms following Lyme disease. However, they haven't been able to determine whether or not these patients actually have active ongoing infection. Part of the challenge here is the testing, and they're using the standard old school 2-tiered testing, which is known to miss about 44% of true positive people. And they know that, and they're working on it, right? And then there's this other group, and they're looking at chronic persistent infection. And we have a lot of evidence, especially some of the work of Monica Embers out of Tulane, multiple different papers with her and a large group of individuals researching this. So we have kind of 2 competing dialogues. And actually what I think is happening with this complex diagnosis of Lyme is that some people have chronic Lyme disease, and some people have post-treatment Lyme disease, and some people have both. In fact, I would suggest most people probably have some of this temporary or maybe even some permanent damage, as well as active ongoing infection. And it's so complicated to figure out the difference, right? So this leads to often a series of very expensive tests trying to sort that out, consultations with a variety of specialists, from the rheumatologist to the neurologist to the infectious disease, your primary care. Then you go to the naturopath, or you go to the Lyme specialist or whomever. And now, before you know it, you've seen 5, 10, 20 different doctors like me, right? I went through so many different doctors and so many psychiatric diagnoses, and then fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And finally, the naturopath and osteopathic physician I was training in their office with were just like, hey, when I walked in there, it sounded like I had the same thing as everybody else in their office. So finally I felt I wasn't alone. But then the other part was they were like, hey, it sounds like chronic tick-borne illness. Let's take a deep dive into it. And $1,800 a test later, and many years paid off, I had a diagnosis that's allowed me to be cured. I was able to heal over the next 4 years, and now at the time that I'm talking to you, I've been over 12 years symptom-free. So I know you can do it. but you have to get the right diagnosis. And the complexity it's interesting because so many of our studies are done on like lab animals or in these really confined spaces. We control all these variables. The human beings out there, like you and I, we're out there experiencing things like stress, mold exposure, relationship things. Maybe I went to church or I went to the supermarket and I got exposed to a virus or another bacteria that just leads to a common cold. Maybe I haven't been following the best diet. So these things all add to the complexity of the human system working through this lens of also experiencing chronic Lyme. Now, the other thing is we've often heard that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, 70 or 80% of people are going to get better with as little as 2 weeks and upwards of 3 weeks of a standard antibiotic protocol. That's one single antibiotic, commonly doxycycline, and then they're going to be better. And then the other group of people says, oh, chronic Lyme disease, it's rampant, it's all over the place. But what's really interesting is some of the research coming out of Johns Hopkins has shown that it might be that both sides are true. About 80% are getting better, but about 20% are having chronic Lyme. And this research out of Johns Hopkins is actually showing that there may be a thing as early late Lyme disease, meaning that instead of the standard way we get late Lyme disease, which is you get bit by a tick, you get Lyme disease from the bacteria Borrelia burgdorferi, and then you missed it, maybe you don't have a lot of symptoms in the beginning, or maybe they're vague and you get the diagnosis is missed. So 8-9 months later, you have Lyme arthritis, right? Something like that. That's kind of our typical agreed upon way that you might get late Lyme disease or persistent Lyme disease. Now, they found that maybe 15 to 20% of these mice that they were artificially infecting were actually getting inoculated with persister Lyme cells from the beginning, which was leading to essentially the early onset of Lyme arthritis at a rate that was unexpected. And they hypothesized that the spirochetes, the spiral bacteria that are leading the Lyme disease, when they're inside the tick, are going into a persister form, and then the tick is actually inoculating the mouse with these persister forms. So we could get late Lyme disease those two ways. One is we get it the standard way, the other one is we get early late Lyme disease. And so this might explain why about 80% of people are getting better with the standard approach and the other 20% are not. But if you think about the millions and millions and millions of people in the United States, if 20% of the people getting Lyme disease every year, which we know is at least 476,000, and that's probably a very conservative estimate, if you think about 20% of them not getting better with a normal approach, it makes sense that we have multiple camps seeing different things. So the complexity of the diagnosis is really that number one reason why the treatment is so expensive, because it's just, you get delayed diagnosis. We really need to have a definitive diagnosis, and it's hard with all that complexity. Our number two reason for the cost associated with treatment of chronic Lyme disease is long-term treatment, right? So once someone's been diagnosed, the treatment often involves these long-term antibiotic therapy, and that can be costly. A lot of times, if someone needs an intravenous treatment, it might not be covered. Maybe they need an emerging treatment, like a drug like tefenaquine, which is a great antimalarial and antibabesioal drug. Many insurers are not covering it because the research, while it's been going on for the last somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 years, that's pretty young in terms of the medical model. So a lot of times it's not covered. And then the patient is being left to foot that bill. And then, the other part about the chronic nature of this is people, if you need to have a long-term treatment with an antibiotic, maybe you should be doing things like long-term probiotics and detoxification support. We need those nutritional supports to work on all the other things that kind of get broken along the way when you have a chronic infection. And what we're seeing is with a lot of the treatment of persistent Lyme, persistent Babesia, persistent Bartella, or even the treatment of mold illness, actually a lot of the persisters are better treated by herbals and nutraceuticals, supplements if you will, than they are actually by medications. So this is kind of an interesting conundrum, right? So you're trying to get your treatments as dialed in as possible, but in order to treat everything, I might need antibiotics and supplements, and almost no supplements are being covered by insurance. You're left footing that bill. Now, the other thing that comes up when we look at this whole thing is that, a lot of times, even just people get fed up. They've been on antibiotics for so long, they need a change. Well, we have other antimicrobials evidence-based. We know they work really well. And, the problem is they're herbs, and you're ending up paying for those. And so it's not that it's bad. It's just that our medical system, our insurers don't see the value in these, and they're just not covering it. So the longer your treatment goes, the more you might need additional treatments. The other part about long-term treatment is the longer you're sick, the more likely you're going to have concurrent things happening. I see so many people, they lose jobs, they lose friends, they got their hours cut back. Things just aren't really going the way they would like them to go. End up having to go on a special diet, right? So yeah, should we all eat organic? Yeah, would it be great to all be keto and paleo and this and gluten-free and dairy? Sure, some of these things might be great, but when you're well and you have metabolic flexibility, you can do a little bit of that. But when you're sick, you really have to double down on your diet and you have to be more pristine, which just adds to the cost of this treatment. So the longer the treatment goes, the more you're actually having to pay for all these adjunctive things, right? And even if you just keep it simple, you're on a couple antibiotics that are covered by your insurance, you add in a cyst buster like tinidazole, well then you got to add in a B complex and you have to have 1 or 2 or 3 different probiotics. Those add up over time. And so really one of the things that's so important to me is that I want to get this information out to you. I want to share the advances in the diagnosis and treatment of Lyme disease. And so if you're enjoying learning about this and learning about how the new emerging things like tefenoquine, maybe double dose dapsone and disulfiram, and all these herbs and nutrients and detox supports that we talk about on the channel, if you're enjoying that and you're really enjoying it in a no-cost way, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Again, it's no cost to you because I know how much it costs. I was a patient and now I'm treating for the last 15 plus years. I've been treating patients just like you. I want you to know that when you hit that like and subscribe button, it really helps our channel and it allows me to continue to create this amazing free content for you. So I think it's really important. So again, number 1 is the complexity of the diagnosis. Number 2 on our list of the top 6 is long-term treatment, and it just adds up. And number 3 is co-infections. One of the things that so many people have heard about, maybe they don't understand completely, but is this concept of when you have Lyme disease, you may also have to look for co-infections. And if you have a hidden co-infection or a known co-infection, it can actually make the symptom presentation more complicated. It could make you sicker. It could be more confusing for us to diagnose. So this actually is kind of like a double whammy with number 1 and adding on to that complexity of the diagnosis. So there was a great paper that came out of Yale where they're saying, hey, they were realizing that Lyme disease and babesiosis happened together more often than they were expecting. Anybody in the Lyme, in the Lyme literate doctor field and working with chronic Lyme disease, we were like, duh, like we've known about this, but it's so complex and it's becoming so well known now, thanks to the effort of so many people, that major research institutions are starting to pay attention. So while that is actually going to be a great thing for reducing costs in the long run, because the more awareness, the more research, the more the conventional medical system looks at this and goes, it's a possibility, the better it's going to be. So back to co-infections. So we have things like anaplasmosis, babesiosis, Borrelia miyamotoi, and those can all be tick-borne co-infections. And co-infection just means that it's another infection that's happening at the same time. Now, the other thing is, we talk about Bartella very commonly in the Lyme world, and the question is it tick-borne or not? Well, at different places in the United States, you can find some Bartella in ticks, but we find it in our patients much, much more commonly. And so we know that Bartella can be transmitted by cat bites and scratches, by house spider bites, even by lice and some other insects. So whether or not it's a tick-borne co-infection or just a co-infection, meaning a co-occurring infection along with Lyme disease, to me it doesn't really matter. I want to find out maybe where it came from. Hopefully we can figure out. But more importantly, when we know it's present and the symptoms are consistent with the presence of the organism, then we can help treat you more effectively, right? And the thing with these co-infections, like I think about mycoplasma pneumonia, chlamydia pneumonia, strep, especially in our children going to school, even mold exposure. These are co-occurring infections, right? Or co-occurring toxins. And I think of things like not even just co-infection, but co-toxins. So we're looking at things like mold, heavy metal toxicity, crappy diet, lack of exercise, stress. I just think it's one of these it's an amazing thing to be able to look at this and go, hey, we can actually look at your whole life and look at you as an individual, and we can bring it all into one lens. Like, just like if I were to adjust the focus on my camera, I want to focus in on what's really affecting you. And a lot of times co-infections and these co-toxins are the things that are making Lyme so complex to diagnose and treat. And if we know about these, we have awareness, then we have a better understanding of what to work on first, and we can actually decrease the duration and the cost of treatment in many cases. And the good news is that there's so many things that you can do at home for free, and to help start mobilizing these toxins, to improve detoxification, to minimize stress. And really, stress is the #1 cause of inflammation in the developed world. So I want to bring down inflammation as much as I can. And on our channel, one of the things that I want to do is empower you to take back control over your health. I want to give you the tips, tricks, and tools that are going to allow you to start healing. In my own healing journey, I spent from year 6 of illness, when my back was against the wall and I didn't know what to do. I just started doing things, right? Somebody handed me a yoga DVD. I started working on that, started working on breath. Body started rejecting crappy foods before I even really understood nutrition and healthy, longevity-based diets that are plant-based, whole foods, adding my proteins on next. Really getting that nutrient-dense diet. I didn't know that, but I started doing the work. And so many times in medicine, we talk about the placebo effect, mind over matter. It's so powerful in the world of medicine that we have to control for it, meaning we always want to verify whether a medical or surgical outcome is because of the actual procedure or the pill or just the placebo. And because the placebo is 1/3 of all outcomes, these other interventions have to outperform that 1/3. And this is so inspiring to me. In my own healing journey, I honestly God think 70% of my healing was the placebo effect. It was mind over matter. It was the things that I chose to do. And the reason that I met those 2 doctors that were able to help me really do that 30% healing was because I took action. There's a gentleman by the name of Wallace Wattles. He was an American philosopher in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he talked a lot about the law of attraction before that was even a thing, right? And he said, you know what? Lyme disease. Here we go. It's funny when it's on your mind, right? And this is the thing I want you to catch on to. This is toxic thinking, right? If you consider yourself a limey or a moldy, please thank yourself for letting that go, and then say, I'm a person with Lyme, with mold, and then describe yourself the way you want to be. Because what Wallace Wattles taught us was that by thought, you bring that which you desire to you. It's by action you receive it. So when you have an impulse towards health, you have to take action, even if it's a microscopic amount. We'll dive into that more in other videos, but I just want you to know that one of the biggest co-toxins that you experience is what you're thinking on a regular basis. So just if you label yourself as a limey or moldy, do yourself a favor, cut that out, change it around. Just make it like, hey, I'm Tom, I'm a loving father, I'm a loving husband. My goal is to get back outside and ski and hike and mountain bike and do the things I love. I currently have Lyme disease and I'm healing from it. Totally different thing than Tom, I'm a limey, right? So it changes the way my physiology works and it allows my immune system to work better. And so these are things you can do at home. So make sure you stay tuned to the channel. Again, hit like and subscribe so that you can get more of these free detox and stress management tips that are going to help you improve your overall health. And in other videos, I go very, very deeply into the different things that you can do. In this one, I just want to really go over these top 5 reasons that Lyme is so darn expensive and start to give you a little bit of motivation and inspiration for how we can change that. So back to our list. Number 4, the trial and error approach, right? I alluded to this at the beginning of our video here, but the complexity of the disease and each person's unique individual responses really lead us to having to do like that treatment that involves trial and error. Like I said, I think has this negative connotation. When you're working with someone like myself, we might do a therapeutic trial. We're trying something, but it's not that we're just willy-nilly and throwing something against the wall and see if it sticks. It's evidence-based, it's experience-based, but you are going to respond completely different than any other unique human being on the planet. So when we're out there, one of the biggest problems, and we'll get to this in another one of our top 6, but is comparing your protocol to someone else's, all right? So because you have a different reaction than they will. So we'll come back to that. But really, the need to play Lyme chess, to try something and then reevaluate based upon your response, to modify what we're doing because of how your body tells us that you're uniquely responding, how the bugs and the pathogens and the toxins are interacting with your physiology. All of that leads to the use of multiple different treatment protocols. Each of those have their own cost. And then really, we have to find the one that works for you. And I remember when I started training this, I was taught, hey, always ask somebody what their best treatment protocol was. Because commonly what's gonna happen is you're gonna find one approach that works really well, and then the results will peter out. You'll hit a plateau. Then you'll need to change it up a few different times. But then sometimes after a few changes, you're like, oh my goodness, nothing's working. Okay, what was your best protocol? Maybe we need to go back to that. And oftentimes when you have had a break from your best protocol and you go back to it, it works. So this is one of the things that, like, as a licensed healthcare practitioner, it can be very, very difficult to develop the expertise needed to really address the complexities of working with patients who have chronic tick-borne illnesses and these other environmentally acquired illnesses. And unfortunately, this is not something I was taught, or any of my mentors or any of my colleagues were taught in medical school. We were left to figure this out on our own. I was fortunate to have amazing mentors like Dr. Richard Horowitz and Dr. Charles Ray Jones, who would allow me to bug them, and pick their brains for their experience. But a lot of it was looking over their shoulder, trying to figure out how to apply what they're doing with their patient on my patients when I'm alone, right? And then hoping they could pick up the phone for me when I needed it. So one of the things that I've done to help try to minimize this cost, minimize the duration of the suffering of my patients and so many of the patients that I can't work with, is through recognizing that gap. So I've developed the world's first 12-month Lyme disease practitioner certification and mentorship program. I call it the LDPC for short, but the program is really designed to train and really acknowledge and get in front of you, this next generation of Lyme disease treatment experts. Because our goal is really to equip healthcare practitioners with the knowledge and the skills to provide effective, evidence-based treatment for chronic Lyme disease and some of the associated conditions. And so by investing in our program, these practitioners become a part of the solution for the high cost of Lyme disease treatment, because they're able to provide, once they go through the program, they've got direct mentorship, they've got the best learning available, constantly being updated with the latest evidence, right? So that they can then provide you with an expert level of care where there's not as much trial and error. It's more like the art and science of medicine. It's evidence-based because I provide them a roadmap, right? So they can reduce the likelihood of treatment failures and unnecessary expenses for you. Ultimately, this is going to lead to better patient outcomes, a reduction in the overall cost of treating this incredibly challenging disease. So chronic Lyme disease treatment can be expensive. Really, the cost can be significantly reduced through expert level care. People who have a great amount of experience, and that's what our mentorship does. They get this quickly rather than over many decades like it took me and many of my colleagues, right? And we really want to provide expert care and effective treatment strategies for each and every one of you. So really, our Lyme disease practitioner certification and mentorship program takes a step towards achieving this goal. So if you're a healthcare practitioner, or you're a patient who knows a practitioner who's really looking to effectively and efficiently develop your level of expertise as quickly as possible with the support of a community of experts, and they also really want to develop their comfort level so that they feel confident that they're doing the very best for their patients in treating complex chronic tick-borne illnesses, check out the link below and hit the LDPC link, and you'll be able to learn more about that program. So this is something that I think is really, really important, because we have another problem, our number 5 problem, which is lack of insurance coverage. Many insurance companies don't fully cover the cost of chronic Lyme disease treatment, especially for that long-term antibiotic therapy. And I alluded to this early in our video. This leaves patients kind of to shoulder a significant portion of the treatment cost out of pocket. I know that pretty much everything I used wasn't covered, so that just added on to the bill from the labs, right? So it can be a daunting task to really finally have some idea of what might be causing your problems, only to find out now you have to shell out a ton of extra cash out of your own pocket because your insurance isn't covering what is necessary to diagnose Lyme disease and to treat Lyme or one of these other infections. So thankfully, there are many organizations that are backed by generous individuals who are out there who can provide support when you most need it. One of my favorites is Limelight Foundation. They are a nonprofit that actually has all of their operating costs covered 100% by a donor. So when anyone else donates to the organization, 100% of everything they donate goes to patients. So I've had children who got better who donated $1, and they knew that $1, 100% of it was going to another kid in need. So Limelight Foundation to date has delivered over $9 million in grants to children 25 and younger for the diagnosis and treatment of Lyme disease. And it's so helpful. And there are many other organizations like there. So for the most comprehensive list of these organizations that I've seen, I'm going to put a link in the description to the Global Lyme Alliance and their website. And that link will take you directly to their patient assistance page, right? So once you're there, check out not only all the amazing organizations that can help children and adults get the diagnosis and treatment support that they need, but also look at all the other amazing work. Because what's really interesting about GLA, the Global Lyme Alliance, is that they have and continue to support some of the most cutting-edge research in tick-borne illness out there. So if you've heard about the work that came out of Johns Hopkins with all the amazing herbal findings, and you read the paper on tafenoquine and babesiosis that just came out earlier this year, what you might not know is that GLA were major sponsors of those initiatives, and they continue to do this work. So check them out, send them an email and just say thanks, but check in the description below for their link to get to the patient support financial assistance page that has links to all the major organizations. So on to number 6, and I would say, in my experience, aside from just the complexity of Lyme in general, this is probably our number 1 issue: doctor shopping and self-managed protocols. I get it, you're suffering. I was suffering. I get it, there's confusion. I was confused, and there's certainly times where I'm still confused. So many of my patients, in their quest for relief from the suffering from chronic Lyme and other tick-borne illnesses, really often resort to doctor shopping. If they don't get a quick result, or they don't get the answer that they think they want, they start seeking multiple opinions and pursuing multiple different approaches to treatment, each of which, if they were on their own, probably would work. But when we start combining random protocols and picking and choosing from what we read on the internet, it often doesn't work, right? So it leads to inconsistent care, inconsistent results, and it also often will escalate costs. And some individuals, in their attempt to manage their own protocols, this is often based on information that they've read online that's not been vetted, that's not actually scientifically validated. And it's like people read emotional accounts, right? And then they just say, oh, I got to do that too. Not maybe understanding the background information of how it works into their own experience of their unique pathophysiology, their own unique experience of the infections and all the other toxins and all the other wonderful things that make up who they are as a unique individual. So I would highly recommend, when you go out online, even when you're listening to my videos, see what resonates with you, investigate it as a possibility and opportunity to learn, and then sit down with your healthcare provider who has an expertise in this. And if you're looking for someone with expertise, head over to origins-of-health.com and look for our practitioner training directory and find out where some of these people who have trained with me are. And just because you say Lyme on your shingle doesn't mean that you're a true expert. We know this from across the internet. Anybody can tell you a sensational, emotional story. Plus, I want them to back it up with actual, real knowledge, real clinical experience, not only selling you supplements, but actually getting people with chronic Lyme better. And so when you're getting information that's sourced from the internet, just be aware you have to do your own due diligence and ask for references, ask for referrals, and just stop comparing yourself to other people. Learn from them, be aware of what might work, sit down with your practitioner and come up with a protocol. And then honestly, you need to stop changing your protocol because you read something online. Because many times what I'm doing is I'm creating a protocol where I put them all together, and it's like I'm playing the Rubik's Cube, right? I'm going, and I'm lining it up, getting ready for it to work. And I see a path and a protocol that works. Now, I also know from the Rubik's Cube, there are many ways to solve it. But in any one of those ways to solve it, if you don't follow that protocol, it doesn't work. So if I mix and match one from column A, one from column B, one from column E, that may work, but more times than not, it won't. So I just want to let you know, I'm sure some people aren't going to like the answer, or the recommendation, but I have to be truthful with you. It is the number one way people accidentally self-sabotage themselves, which is reaching out and trying their best to feel better. Find the things you're interested in trying, but before you do them, talk about it with your practitioner and see how it fits into your unique protocol. I do that all the time with people. If they're interested in it, I just need to know, and maybe it'll work or maybe it won't. But if we work as a team, and that's the other thing, when you talk to an LDPC provider, they're all about teamwork. So if your practitioner is not about teamwork, maybe ask them if they could be a little bit more team player, right? And less dictatorial. Find out, work with somebody who really understands who you are and is willing to work with you. Now, with that said, you have to understand the person you're working with is going to be more objective than you because they're not you. They're not directly experiencing it. They can be empathetic and compassionate, but they're not feeling you. As one of my mentors, Mary Morrissey, who's a great mindset coach who's run multiple peace summits for world leaders on behalf of the Dalai Lama, she says, you can't see the picture from within the frame. So when you're in it, it's hard to be objective, which is why you work with someone who's a third party who's objective, but also empathetic, compassionate, and has that experience. So I just want to make sure that you avoid wasting your time, wasting your money, and avoid potentially harmful therapies, because ultimately that could lead to more suffering and increased expenses due to treatment failures and the need for corrective interventions, right? So let's not be doing that. So anyway, there you have it. Our top 6 reasons that the treatment of chronic Lyme disease costs so dang much, and some of the things we can do about it. So what do you think? Did I get them all? Was I too hard in one area, not hard enough in the other? Did I miss something? Are there any reasons that I might have overlooked? And if I have, please share those reasons down in the comment below. I'm sure we could go on and make the list 100 long. These are just the top 6 that I see most commonly that I wanted you to be aware of. But stay tuned, and again, like I said, if you like this kind of free information and you want to get tips on how to reduce the stress, how to reduce the toxins, how to optimize your self-healing so that when you do these other protocols with your practitioner, it'll work better. I always say I want my body to be 2 things. One is ready to receive healing, so I want to have the strongest foundation possible, and I want to be the world's worst bacterial, parasitic, viral host imaginable, so that if I'm standing next to somebody else, these bugs want to go to them because they know I'm so healthy. And that's really what this channel is about. That's what we're working on. So click like and subscribe, hit those bell notifications. That way you can know when our next videos come out for all this wonderful education. And until next time, this is Dr. Tom. Thanks so much for joining me.